Welcome to Men's Lab Panels 101. In case you missed the first part of this lecture, be sure to check that video out. It's going to be an introduction and your basic test that we went over. This lecture series does coincide with an article series I wrote. You could check that series out on covertfitwell.com or on my Substack at covertfitwell. That's going to have a lot more information than what I'm going to cover here, especially, for instance, on today's lecture. It will have the actual ranges that you want to be in optimally for these different vitamin and mineral levels, as well as the units of measurement and whatnot. Today, when I'm talking about these, I'm not going to bother trying to remember the different units of measurement because they're always different for every value on a lab test. So I'll just say the number range, but be sure to check out the article for just more information in general. And we'll also have that coming for part 3, which will be a lot more comprehensive when we get to the hormone section. So that's covertfitwell.com and Substack at covertfitwell. So today we're going to go into essential vitamins and minerals here. So this is where we covered our basic panels the other day, right, or in part 1. And essential vitamins and minerals is where things often start to go awry with providers, at least from what I've seen. I discussed in part 1 how most times people aren't even getting the appropriate tests called. If they are, a lot of times they're not the right versions. It's not the correct interpretation of those panels either. Be sure to check that out for more information there, and I'll continue to kind of point that out throughout this video series. But when we get into essential vitamins and minerals, understand that these are going to kind of set the basic, like this is basic nutritional science 101. These are things that you can't live without, right? And if these are deficient, things are going to go wrong. Processes throughout the whole body can and often will go wrong. And so when we talk about these basic panels we covered, or getting into, as we get into the sex hormones, the thyroid, the adrenals, etc., and then just basic brain function, these are not optional. And yet I see these, several, if not all of these, routinely missed on labs called by providers. And I can think of a great example of a client who, experienced depression, rapid heart rate, low mood, low energy, etc. Provider threw 3 different SSRI antidepressant drugs at this client over the course of a couple years, failed all of them, luckily. And it turns out the client simply had a pretty mean vitamin B12 deficiency, as well as vitamin D, which is extraordinarily common. We'll get into it in a second. And just introducing those things brought up the energy, fixed the heart rate, brought up the mood. So, these aren't optional tests, and providers know this. But I think, again, I discussed in part 1, there's some red tape, there's some laziness, right? We won't get into the reasons why, but at any rate, these are the ones you absolutely don't want to miss. We could call for more than just these if we wanted to, and sometimes we'll have to, but I'm going to cover the ones that are not optional here. So we're going to start with vitamin D, because vitamin D is the most deficient hormone in, first world society, period, let alone the USA. Vitamin D is responsible for tons of processes throughout the body. In some instances, it actually behaves more like a hormone, but we'll leave that aside for now. Vitamin D is crucial for immune health. It's crucial for brain function. Really big. Can be implicated in mood and whatnot. There's a direct correlation between people experiencing things like seasonally affective depression and whatnot, and sunlight, which is where you're supposed to derive most of your natural vitamin D from. Vitamin D is not very well absorbed in the diet, so even if you get enough of it, which can be difficult to do, not impossible, even if you get enough of it in the diet itself, you're basically, almost nobody is absorbing as much of it as they should. Really, your main production is supposed to come from sunlight and natural light. However, if, most of us can't be outside all day for the adequate time it would take. Most of us, if we're outside, we're fully clothed. You'd have to have most of your skin exposed. And then obviously there's seasonal, things depending on where you live. So vitamin D is one of those not optional to test. And for the vast majority of people, I've never really seen anybody who's come through and I've been like, your level's fine. Don't worry about supplementing anymore. It's pretty much everybody should be supplementing it. So when we talk about deficiency rates, so the numbers vary. What you can find somewhat consistently is that give or take about 2/3 of the population is insufficient levels. And that's going to be a theme that we talk about here throughout this series, is the difference between deficient and sufficient or optimal. And so something that's important to remember right off the bat, and this is really going to be crucial when we get into the sex hormones portion of this lecture. We have lab ranges for things, okay? But understand, I think people are always shocked to learn that lab ranges are literally derived from an average of the population, and that's not stratified by age, okay? So everybody ages 18 to 88 is, adults are going to be distributed throughout these ranges that we list. And so you can imagine that, especially when we get into things like hormones, right? Testosterone, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. You can imagine how an 18-year-old shouldn't be the same as an 80-year-old, but yet that's not accounted for in that reference range. And you can also imagine how, and this is more specific to something like these vitamins, vitamin D, for example, you can also imagine how, we're not a healthy population by and large, right? We have a roughly 40% obesity rate. We have a lot of mental health issues. Our nutrition, I think everyone at this point knows, is really not adequate. So it would be reasonable to say that if you're near that bottom end of a reference range, you're probably not doing well. And so when we look at, again, we say 2/3 are insufficient. It depends on what they consider sufficient, which I haven't dug into, but I know that sufficient in this case would be between 60 and 80, okay, on the measurements used. Upwards of 100. You don't really want to go too far past 100. Too much can be bad. It's really hard to get that much and absorb that much. I've never seen it. It exists, but it's rare. Um, it, Anything less than 60, anything less than absolute low 50 is not good enough. So I think the range, the lab range on most standard lab panels is, I believe, 30 to 100. And so you can see if you're in that bottom of the range, you're not good enough. And you might be having problems with your immune health, with your mood. Like I said, I've never seen somebody who comes back and I'm like, you shouldn't bring that level up a little more. I routinely get people in like the 30s, low 30s, maybe 40. And we try to get them up at least over 60, 70, 80 in there. So supplementing vitamin D is really just something that you should definitely get a lab test to know where you're at and kind of periodically check it to make sure you're in that range. Because like we said, there's a sweet spot. But for pretty much everybody in Western culture, supplement vitamin D. And then we're going to move on. So vitamin D is by far the most common deficiency. And at this point, I think a vitamin D panel should just be in your basic panels like a CBC, CMP, et cetera. I don't know how it's even optional at this point, given the deficiency rates. But then we move on. B12 is extremely common, so I think a lot of people know that. B12 and B9, folate and B12 are both deficient. Again, we get into deficient, okay, maybe only a few percent of the population, but insufficient, not optimal, we're talking upwards of 20% roughly for each of these of the population, so 1 in 5 people. And again, bottom ranges, so like B12, I think the range goes all the way down to like 200 or 300, maybe. I think 200-ish is the cutoff. I want to see people at least 500 or 600, upwards of the top end of the reference range, which is near like 1,000, 1,100. With B vitamins, really, you can't really have too much. If you did, you'd just be overstimulated and pee them out. Folate, same thing, around 20%, could be insufficient. Again, bottom range is like 3. I want to say it's about 3.0 on the test ranges. Again, I want to see people at least 7, 6, 7, really upwards of that. A lot of good kind of functional wellness specialists will tell you get into the teens if you can. And caveat I should say about B vitamins, okay, because when we get into this, we got B12, B9, B6. With your B12, your B9, or your folate, and your B6, about 10% of the population, give or take. The thing is that these vitamins, in particularly B12 and folate or B9, can absolutely be affected by people's ability to absorb them. Meaning, there is about 40% of the population is what's called, they have a deficiency in what's called the MTHFR gene, which you can look into. I discussed a little more in my article. It basically means they don't metabolize these B vitamins well at all. Basically, it's just a common genetic mutation that affects your ability to what's called methylate. Okay, so B vitamins, kind of just a quick little aside here. B vitamins help what's called methylate or express your DNA. B vitamins are very important for DNA synthesis. So when we get into, people who, why would someone be low in B12, B9? Because these are fairly able to get through the diet. If you eat a well-balanced diet, you can get enough. Why are people so deficient in these? Well, they can't absorb them that well. If they have MTHFR mutation, it basically makes it so that they require a methylated version of these B vitamins in order to convert these B vitamins into usable energy to methylate the DNA in their body. And so this is where we get into not all supplements, not all forms of supplements, or even food for that matter, are created equal. So for these individuals, we want to see them take a methylated version of these vitamins. And so, for example, in our food, most of the folate or B9 that we get is folic acid, which those people are not going to tend to metabolize well. They would need L-methylfolate, right? And so this is kind of the nuances of how specific this stuff can get. And so what I tell most of my clients are, if you're deficient, and or I tell most of my clients, just take a multivitamin. If you don't absolutely have to test these. It's good to know, especially if you're symptomatic, right? But you can cover most of your basic needs with a multivitamin, and you can end up, if it's a good quality multivitamin, a methylated multivitamin, you can get what you need from that. And so I tell most of my clients, if you're going to take a multivitamin or when you supplement, if you do come back low or lower levels on these, just take a methylated B complex or multivitamin, and that'll cover. There's a rarer subset of the population. I myself am actually one of them, who are what's called overmethylators, who tend to use those methylated B vitamins too well, in other words. And what you'll see with these types of people is they'll get a little bit overstimulated sometimes from methylated. They'll get like too much energy, a little bit too amped up, maybe a little bit anxious or irritable. If that's the case, then if you try a methylated version and it doesn't react well, then you could just go back to different versions of these vitamins. But you can also just find this out for those that are interested, like, how do I not play the guessing game? Not everybody wants to do this, but you could just get a simple cheek swab done. They make home tests now. You just get it and send it out, or you can get it from, most PCPs will do it now. You can just get a cheek swab done. It'll evaluate if you have an MTHFR mutation, and then you'll know for sure where you fall in these. So testing these and then optionally finding out if you're a poor methylator can be very, very useful for people. So we see that with the B vitamins here. Another extraordinarily common one here is going to be ferritin. Okay, so ferritin, for all intents and purposes here, is a proxy for iron. It is a protein that stores iron. Iron is not a great by itself, is not necessarily the most reliable marker for iron, because iron serum levels tend to fluctuate a lot in the blood. Ferritin is a more stable and accurate marker for how much iron you have stored in your reserve capacity, because the body regulates iron it very tightly regulates iron. Too much iron has toxicity and can have a lot of oxidative stress on the body. So again, there's a very kind of narrow range that the body allows iron to be stored and utilized in. And so ferritin we look at as a proxy for iron. And again, there's estimates that potentially a third of the population is, insufficient, deficient, whatever you want to call it, in their ferritin levels, i.e. their iron storage. And anyone that's dealt with iron deficiency, it doesn't even have to be anemia, but people who have had anemia will know for sure. Even just low normal, if you're an active person, if you're a very active person, right, it can be miserable. The fatigue, the slowness, the cognitive slowness, affects really your ability to do everything. So ferritin iron is one of those ones where we absolutely want to get some levels taken and make sure that you're in range. The other thing I tell, a lot of my guys are on TRT or getting into TRT, right? And I always remind them, providers I've never heard them talk about this, but it's a fact, TRT, testosterone replacement, is going to stimulate red blood cell production, which is going to use up more iron in the body. And if you're pushing your testosterone level 3 or 4 times higher than it used to be, that can be a relatively quick process. And you'll get a lot of guys who around the 3-month mark or so of TRT are just like, why am I more tired? I was feeling great. Why am I more tired? Well, we look at their iron, their ferritin, and they're in the toilet and no one checked. And so then you get into, supplementing. Iron's another one where if you're going to supplement iron, make sure you're working with someone that's qualified, because iron supplementation can be tricky. Number one, like I said, you don't want too much. But number two, and I'd say more the immediate concern, is that this is where not all supplements are created equal. And the ones that aren't, so great for someone can be not just not useful, but they can actually be, I don't want to say harmful, right? But they can present problems. So there's really only one. This is, again, we get into the nitty gritty of nutritional science. There's really only one form of iron that is maximally absorbable in the body, or I should say absorbable for some people at all. And that's what's called heme iron, which is only found in animal foods. Iron that you get in like fortified cereals and plant foods is not, for many, many people, going to metabolize well in the gut. And that's why they have a deficiency in the first place. They don't metabolize well. That can be different, GI issues, why that is. People that have IBS, celiac disease, things like that tend to, iron's a difficult thing for the gut to absorb fully, especially if there's GI stress. And a lot of that iron from some of these other forms will just sit in your gut. So if you're taking a high dose supplement, some people say try to pair it with vitamin C. That never made a difference for me personally. I could not digest these other forms of iron. I had really prominent GI issues in the 2 weeks I tried. Affected my mood too. Because we said iron can produce a lot of oxidative stress. So it's just sitting there in your gut, right? So long story short is that when you're supplementing iron, this can be tricky. A lot of people will only tolerate or absorb heme iron, which the supplements are a little more expensive and have to be dosed a little differently. And then some people will just opt for injection. So if you're dealing with low ferritin, low iron, make sure you are, working with someone who's qualified and can help you navigate what works best for your body. And then if you see low ferritin, so I usually call for ferritin up front. If I see low ferritin and it's, again, like borderline questionable, I will then call for what's called, I'll call for just serum iron itself, but I'll call for total iron binding capacity, or TIBC, and then a transferritin saturation test. And these can just be a little bit more specific markers to see, like, because we want to tightly regulate iron, right? Is this person really deficient? Are they trending down? What's the deal? So super important to look at ferritin. We're going to move on to magnesium. So before we get into magnesium and vitamin C here, I have, this little note here: testing not usually needed. Okay, and the reason I say that is because magnesium and vitamin C they're different for different reasons. Magnesium, though, the reason is simply because the magnesium test that you get from your blood serum is only it's about less than 1% of the magnesium in your body. All right, and so you could be, and most people are, they're normal on their serum levels of magnesium, but that doesn't mean that they have enough magnesium adequately, in the body as a whole. And magnesium is responsible for like 400 processes, upwards 400 different processes in the body, everything from nerve function to mood to anxiety, big in sleep and anxiety, like very underrated. And again, magnesium, you look at about give or take estimates half, again, I think it's more than that. First of all, I've never met somebody that couldn't use more. Magnesium is one of those minerals where it's just, you can't really take too much of it. So I usually tell people just supplement it. That's why I say testing not needed. The answer is just supplement it. But about half the population, like I said, I think need more. I think everybody needs more. Reason being is we don't have a lot of magnesium left in our soil from modern agricultural practices and different pesticides and whatnot. So magnesium is going to be, in my opinion, really, I always tell people your kind of non-negotiables are a magnesium supplement, a vitamin D, a multivitamin, a good multivitamin, and then I say vitamin C. The reason I say testing not needed, you can test it. You can get an accurate proxy via test. Vitamin C, though, again, insufficient in about 40-ish% of the population. That's a decent chunk. True deficiencies rare, and true vitamin C deficiency is a little less prominent or pronounced than A lot of these other ones can be. Like these ones over here, if you're deficient, they'll really, really affect you. Magnesium, same thing. Vitamin C, your body, there's different, if you get into the details of it, your body can kind of function with insufficiency. Doesn't mean it's optimal, but again, vitamin C is a very potent antioxidant. A lot of people know it's good for immune health, skin health, different things like that. So I usually tell people just supplement it. If you don't get it in a good multivitamin that you take, just supplement it. You can never really have too much of it. And so that's why I say these guys, testing is usually not needed. One of them, magnesium, the test isn't accurate, and you'll just need more anyway, or you should be taking more. Vitamin C, again, the test can be accurate, but you can get one if you want to know where you're at, but I tell people it doesn't hurt you to take extra. Last two, and I say, are follow-up tests. So we have MMA, or methylmalonic acid, and homocysteine. Okay, so these are kind of more accurate proxies for your B vitamins. All right, so methylamonic methylmalonic acid is a very accurate proxy for B12. So basically, it's a metabolite of B12. And what you'll see is, we'll call these, if you're like borderline or questionable, you're kind of low, normal, or deficiency suspected despite normal levels. This can just give you, if you're curious, again, I usually just tell people supplement, but if you're curious, these can give you a little bit more of a accurate proxy. Basically, if methylmalonic acid is elevated, it means your B12 status is low. Likewise, if homocysteine is elevated, it means your B12, less accurately so than MMA, but B12, folate, and or B6 could be low. So again, we can use these tests as kind of follow-up proxies if we're questionable. They just can get a little more specific, and they can be useful in certain contexts. And we put MMA with B12, and then homocysteine with B12, but a little less accurately, folate and B6. High levels equal low levels of the vitamin. So that is where kind of again, there's more that we could test. But these, especially these guys here on the left, like vitamin D, your basic B vitamins and your ferritin status are not optional and very commonly deficient. So check them. Have a provider check them. You can self-check them on tests like walkinlab.com. They're not expensive tests, even if you do pay out of pocket. Always make sure that if you need to supplement, high quality supplements, if you guys have any questions about those, I'm happy to answer any comments about what's good supplements for each. And we're going to wrap up there today for part 2. Again, check out the article that goes with this, covertfitwell.com, Substack at covertfitwell. And then next one we're going to get into is going to be a little bit more comprehensive because we're going into hormones. So we got a lot to cover there. As always, if you like this video, please subscribe, like the video, share, comment. I'm always happy to respond to any questions anybody has. And look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.